Greetings, everybody. You got Jaime and Fuego here, and it's actually my 32nd birthday today. So it's rather befitting that I'm kind of reaching the end of a journey that's taken years at this point. We're talking, over 4 years now, I'd say. So basically, many people know that Stephen King is my favorite author. And he has been for a number of years. I always really enjoyed stuff like, Pet Sematary and The Stand and It when I saw, the films and stuff as a kid, but I'd never really actually read any of his stuff until, it was probably almost 5 years ago that I read Pet Sematary. And that kind of lit a spark for me to want to actually, read through a lot of his books. And so I picked up The Stand, which I'd never read before, which as many of you guys know is over 1,000 pages. It is like an arduously long book, but so fulfilling and so amazing. And I did a little bit of research and found out that apparently the main bad guy in The Stand, his name is Randall Flagg. That's right, the walking dude. He shows up in lots of other Stephen King stuff. And so for that reason, after, finding out about the Dark Tower series and just how, Flagg pops up in other stuff, I took it upon myself to start reading and collecting every Stephen King release. Yeah, that's right. Every Stephen King release. And so what I did, as you will see right here, is I slowly collected all of King's works. That's right. All of them. And it's been quite the interesting process, first of collecting them, but even more so of actually reading through them. And I started right there, as you can probably see, with Carrie, which I've got a couple different forms of. I've got the Cemetery Dance Special Edition of, and of course right there, I hope you can see it well, the original version of it. And but getting back to me, it's a process that has had its ups and downs, from Carrie to Salem's Lot, which actually does have some play in the Dark Tower series eventually, and then going through The Shining, and then the different, as I look at the collection, all of the different collected works like Night Shift, and then later on Skeleton Crew, and Everything's Eventual, and it's been insane just reading 50 different Stephen King books over the course of these last 4+ years. Let's just rattle them off. Carrie, Salem's Lot, Shining, Night Shift, The Stand, The Dead Zone, Firestarter. Dance Macabre was him basically talking about the craft himself, and then segueing into Cujo, and then finally, that's where we finally meet Roland Deschain, who is, pursuing this Dark Tower of his, and he's just so adamantly doing it, and the book starts, with him by himself, chasing after, the Man in Black, and the Man in Black is, in fact, Flagg, just in kind of a different form. And the cool thing about Flagg and how The Stand is what pulled me into reading all of these is that Flagg, he's in the Dark Tower, obviously, he's in The Stand, obviously, but he also shows up in, Eyes of the Dragon, which was King actually doing kind of a fantasy take, medieval type thing, which a lot of people were probably surprised by. I kind of was at the time. And Different Seasons was another great collection of stories. And then you segue into his 80s work like Christine and Pet Sematary, which is still one of my absolute favorites because it is just possibly the darkest thing King has ever written. There's a reason why he put it inside a drawer for years and is like, I'm not touching this, I'm just not going to release it. It's too fucked up, pardon my expression. But, and then segueing into the Talisman, which actually ties in heavily with a lot of the Dark Tower mythology, and then, doing some of the Bachman stuff like Thinner and The Long Walk, and I've been captivated so long by his stuff, and then It, which, all of the stuff with the turtle ties in directly to the Dark Tower. And I guess King, as the second decade of his writing career wore on, was when he started to realize everything is going to tie in some fashion to the tower, at least a little bit, And then Eyes of the Dragon was followed by, the second King book, or the second Dark Tower book, Drawing of the Three, and then great stuff like Misery and the Tommyknockers, where he went into more thriller territory, and then sci-fi territory, and then The Dark Half, which was so masterfully adapted by George Romero into a great film. So blessed I got to interview him at Scarefest this past month, and then more collected stories for Past Midnight, where you've got like the Langoliers, and it just goes on, and then we finally get to where I think the Dark Tower series hit its stride, at least for me, and that was with The Wastelands, Part 3. And that's not to say that I disliked, part 2, but when they started to bring in just the fact that, okay, Roland can actually go to these different worlds, and I mean, I guess it was cool to bring kind of a sense of reality to it, and the fact that, oh, he could just jump to our world and jump to New York in different decades times and such. But I liked when they were keeping more so in the medieval epic fantasy type vibe, and so when they were back in Midworld in part 3, where he's already drawn history and he's, I mean, that was where it really got awesome for me. And that's where they bring Jake into the mix you'd seen in the first book, and the Wastelands was where it really started to get good, in my opinion. And then he didn't touch the Dark Tower for whatever reason for another 7 or 8 almost, years, almost a decade. And, he did interesting things like Needful Things and Dolores Claiborne and Gerald's Game, which, Gerald's Game and Dolores actually tie in with one another. And then he did more collections like Nightmares and Dreamscapes, which has so many cool things in it. But then I think he maybe started to feel the Dark Tower itch again, because even though he didn't go back to the tower just yet, he started to have stories that really tied in heavily with it again. Insomnia, I mean, Patrick Danville directly ties into the final volume of the Dark Tower, and even though you don't see him pop in the Dark Tower until a decade later, it's still very interesting how he sowed the seeds in this novel Insomnia, where he really ended up, it was very prophetic. I don't know how well he was planning all of this, if he really had all the outlines drawn or whatever, but yeah. And then Rose Madder, I'm probably not pronouncing it properly, that that has a woman actually stepping into a painting pretty much into Midworld, or at least in-world or out-world, I don't know, I'm thinking Mortal Kombat now, and then Desperation and the Langoliers, or excuse me, not the Langoliers, the Regulators, I should say, those both directly tied in with aspects of the Dark Tower as well. And so after The Green Mile, which was a very interesting serialized novel that he did, it was finally time to go back. And we actually ended up going a lot further back than I was even expecting. He went back to the childhood of Roland, and that's where he actually got to find out more about Ellen and Cuthbert, and I'm actually very excited to finally, I've been sitting on these Marvel prequel Dark Tower comics for a very long time, and now I'm finally going to get the chance to read them, because I'm at the very finish line of Dark Tower 7. I'm at the point where there's about 20 pages left, and King is like, if you don't want to know what really happens, just stop right here. And it feels kind of crappy on my part for him to do something like that, where he's like, come on, don't do it, even though you want to, because even just saying that makes me want to even more so. And I'm going to, but I think it's a good frame of mind for me to be in right now. As I say, my favorite volumes of the series were 3 and 4, and then in turn 5. But 3 and 4, I think, were where the series hit a stride, and that's also because that's where it tied in the most with The Stand, and they actually go into the alternate reality where that plague has ravaged, not just the United States, but the world. And so, and that's where you have Flag really reveal himself as, an antagonist, but so good. And even after Bag of Bones and Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, and then, Dreamcatcher, and then Black House, which directly tied in with what was happening with these kids in the Kala that you actually find more out about in the next Dark Tower volume in number 5. Black House tied in directly with that, where these children are basically being taken from different areas of different realities and different worlds, and if they have kind of psychic kinetic abilities, they're using that power. The Crimson King who's like the biggest baddie in the entire King universe, to basically break these beams that support the Dark Tower and hold all fabrics of all of the alternate realities, like all of existence, together. It's kind of fascinating, but the series really started to lose me when they started bringing in the evil corporations and all this different stuff. And I mean, I guess it was interesting, but yeah, I mean, even though I loved Black House and I loved Wolves of the Kala, and I really enjoyed From a Buick 8, which kind of tied in with the Dark Tower mythos at least a little bit. It was almost like a cooler, kind of beefed up Christine, in my opinion, in a lot of ways. But, King decided to do this stretch run after he almost passed away. And it really makes sense, because it's a series that he meandered around about for quite a while. And so he even writes that into the final volumes itself. He not only writes himself in there, but he also kind of knocks himself for being so lackadaisical about finishing it. But that old saying about, and they even reference this directly in the final book, it's about the journey and not the destination. You know, there's a lot of truth to that, because I have been on a very lengthy journey. We're talking tens of thousands of pages. I'm like 50 books at this point. You know, if you're including the collected works and everything else. I mean, I've read like 50 Stephen King books in the last 4+ years, trying to get to this destination of fulfillment that I'm about to walk through. And even though they lost me in number 6, and I never liked this Susanna character very much. She just kind of irritated me a little bit. Some of my favorites end up getting killed off in the final volume, but you know, they at least see a light at the end of the tunnel, albeit in an alternate reality. So think what you will of that, and perhaps I'll be thinking differently after I read these final few pages that King has warned me against doing. But it's a very surreal journey to come to a close here on my 32nd birthday. So Stephen King, this goes out to you, buddy. I say gracias for enriching my life so very much, and I'm excited to see what the Wind Through the Keyhole is all about, because I guess that's a bonus story. So in any event, I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for tuning in, and yeah, this has been a very special moment on ENFUEGOTAINMENT. So thanks, guys.